Good morning, everyone. This is Tom. I am doing today's video standing up because my cat decided to take a nap on my office chair. Or my cat has decided to take a nap on my office chair. Which is correct? Has decided? Decided. Both are correct. And we'll talk a little bit about the differences between these two tenses, the present perfect, has decided, and the simple past, decided. So this video is for beginners. There is a lot of information on this topic that can become multiple videos. So I will try to make this bite-sized for the beginner level and speak slower so that they can understand the descriptions and the examples. At the end, I will have another input exercise, which I will read at as fast of a pace as I normally read, for everyone to exercise their listening comprehension. So when I read the differences between how present perfect and past simple are used, I read something like the following. Present perfect is used when an event in the past has a connection to the present. And the simple past is used when there is not a connection to the present. Now, I like to think that all of my activities and things I did in the past have some connection to the present. They've defined me or made me who I am today. So this definition is useless, in my opinion, especially for the beginner in English, learning these tenses. So I prefer to think about in what contexts and what words that can be used in order to define that the simple past must be used and the present perfect cannot be used. This includes words such as last week. Last week, I got a cold. I got sick last week. Present perfect cannot be used here. Last month, I went to Spain. Last month, I went to Spain. Last year, the pandemic began. Last year, the pandemic began. So what do these three phrases have in common? Last week, last year, last month. It's not just the word last, but also that they are all describing time periods that cannot be the present. If instead I said this week or this month, the rules are different. But for last week and last month, there's no way to use a present perfect here. You must use the simple past because these describe times that must be in the past. Last week is not in the present. This also goes for phrases that we all know to have began and finished in the past, such as, it's 11 o'clock now in the morning. At 8 o'clock, I taught a class. At 8 o'clock, I taught a class. So it's not 8 o'clock now, so it must be in the past, and therefore I use the simple past. If instead I said this morning, the rules are a little different. But if I say a discrete, a specific time, 8 o'clock, the simple past is used. Another example would be in August. In August, I traveled to Colorado and surprised my mom on her birthday. I went to Colorado and surprised my mom on her birthday. This is the simple past again because it's October. This month is October. So when I say August, it is generally known that this is a time frame that is ended. It started and ended in the past. If instead I said October, in October, the rules are a little different. So for these ones where the rules are a little different, we'll talk about those in a bit. But for now, any of these words that describe something that happened and began and ended in the past, all will use the simple past tense. This also works for phrases using the word ago. I taught a class 3 hours ago. I taught a class 3 hours ago. I went to Spain a month ago. I went to Spain a month ago. The pandemic began a year and a half ago. the pandemic began a year and a half ago. Again, in all these phrases, only the simple past can be used because it is a discrete time in the past. This term ago means that it's a specific time that must have happened in the past. Another context where we can only use the simple past is when we are speaking about somebody who has passed away or somebody who died. For example, my grandmother passed away several years ago. She lived at one time in the state of Michigan. I can't say my grandmother has lived in Michigan and she passed away. This combination doesn't make sense. If somebody is not around anymore, the simple past is used. However, I have a friend who is still alive, thankfully, and he has lived in Michigan before. He now lives in California. So in this case, you can use the perfect tense because the person is still around. But my grandmother lived in Michigan. She also lived in Utah and has passed away. One final context where the simple past is used and the perfect tense is not is in storytelling. When you are telling somebody a story of something that happened, you will use the simple past to describe all of the events. You can also use the present in certain ways. This is a different topic for another day, but you cannot use the perfect tense, the present perfect tense, to tell individual steps of a story, something that happened to you in the past. When you're telling a story, the idea is that this happened in the past, and you cannot use the present perfect tense for this. So, one exception to this could be if you are quoting somebody. For example, I went to the store yesterday. I met a friend of mine there. My friend asked me, "Have you eaten dinner yet?" So most of the sentences in the story will be in the simple past tense because it is a story in the past. But I can quote things that were said in the past if in the past they were said using the perfect tense. All right, so now we're going to move on to a little bit more complicated topic, which is sometimes when you can use both. Now, generally it is viewed that British English uses the perfect tense more often than American English in many of these cases. However, the perfect tense can also be used in American English, but it sounds a lot more formal. I would usually use it when I'm writing, but I will probably more likely use the simple past tense when I am using some of these words or contexts. So, the first context is if you are giving news or receiving news. Did you hear that Colin Powell died? Did you hear that Colin Powell died? You can also say, have you heard that Colin Powell has died? Have you heard Colin Powell has died? So here, the second one, Colin Powell has died, is usually what I see written in a newspaper. I looked it up this morning. It's written that way in many of the headlines. It's not something I would normally say, though. I would say Colin Powell died. Colin Powell passed away, if I want to be a little more polite. So this is a case where it sounds more formal to use the present perfect, more informal to use the simple past. Another example is using phrases such as already or yet. These two generally in British English, I hear it used with the perfect tense, but in American English, we sometimes like to, in informal situations, use the simple past. For example, have you learned any differences between the present perfect and the simple past yet? Have you learned any differences between the present perfect and the simple past yet? I might say, did you learn any differences between the present perfect and the past simple yet? Yes, I have already learned some differences. Or yes, I already learned some differences. So simple past in these cases sounds a little more informal. There are some other differences between these two, but those are a topic for a different day for a more advanced video. So, last but not least, for the times when using the perfect is potentially more formal or is more often used in British English is when we are talking about time periods that are still in the present, such as today. Today, I have taught a class. That sounds a little more formal to me. Today, I taught a class. I would be more likely to say this. Today, I taught a class. This morning, I taught a class. This week, I worked a lot. This month, I traveled throughout Spain. So in all of these cases, in American English, we are more likely to use the simple past than British English. You may, however, hear some use of the perfect in this scenario, but don't be confused if you hear both. That's because both of them are used regularly by natives. For this week, this month, this year, today, this morning, anything where it could be determined to still be the present. Today, for example, I could be talking about the past, meaning hours ago, or I could be talking about today as a present time frame. With these words, you can usually use both. There's a slight difference again, but this is a topic for a more advanced level. One last context to talk about, and this is important for being able to introduce yourself and talk about your background. So it will involve a third tense. This is the present perfect continuous. This is used to describe things that started in the past and that you continue to do into the future. For example, I have been living in California for 12 years. I have been living in California for 12 years. I still live in California. Today, I live in California. You can use the present perfect for this as well. I have lived in California for 12 years. I have lived in California for 12 years. The main difference is I have been living in California for 12 years. It is certain that I still live here. I know when I hear this that the action continues. If I say I have lived in California for 12 years, there's a possibility that this means that this still might have ended, similar to the simple past. Simple past would be I lived in California for 12 years. In this case, I definitely moved. I lived in Colorado for 22 years. Now I live in California. I have been living in California for 12 years. I lived in Colorado for 22 years. I have been living in California for 12 years. I live in California today. I have lived in California for 12 years. Also okay, commonly used. Just doesn't sound as certain that this activity is continuing, like with the continuous tense. I have been living in California for 12 years. Some examples for those who are wanting to learn some self-introduction. I have been living in California for 12 years. I have been working at the same company during those 12 years. I have been living with different roommates over that time, and I have been living with my cat as well. All of these things continue. I still have roommates, my cat is still around, and I still live in California, and I still work for the same company. All right, so we'll go on to the input exercise now, because I think this video is already getting a bit too long. So I'm gonna read this at as normal of a pace as I can. I will include a transcript of the input exercise. I may also include a transcript of this whole video just in case there are absolute beginners that are having difficulty understanding. Okay? So, have you ever been to Spain? I went to Spain last month. It was so much fun. I ate a lot of Spanish food, drank a lot of sangria, and I met many nice people. I have already decided to return in 2022, and I've been planning my next trip for a few weeks. Last week, for example, I looked up plane and train tickets to find the best deals. Did you hear that Spain has a vaccination rate over 80%? Have you heard that Spain is one of the safest countries in the world? My grandmother, my grandparents, both of them, went to Spain several years ago. They've since passed away. Back then, Spain was not nearly as safe as it is today. So that's it for today. I hope this video hasn't become too long and that you haven't fallen asleep. But let me know in the comments what you think. Continue to give me feedback, both beginners and intermediates, if you have stuck around this long. And I'll see you in the next video.